Part 1: The Return. The rain was falling steadily when Emily Turner stepped out of the taxi and faced the house she had once called home. It looked smaller than she remembered, crouching beneath the heavy sky like a weary old man. The white paint had faded into a dull gray, the shutters hung crooked, and the front porch creaked in protest as she set her suitcase down. She hadn't been back in nearly 12 years. Now her father was dead. The phone call had come 2 weeks earlier. A heart attack, sudden and final. Margaret, her mother, had delivered the news with a voice so calm that Emily had felt a flash of anger. No sobs, no cracks, just a flat sentence. "Your father's gone. The funeral is on Saturday. You should come home." And so she had. But the word home felt strange on her tongue. Inside, the house smelled the same, faintly of cedar and dust, with that undertone of old books. Yet there was a weight to the silence, as if the walls were holding their breath. Emily carried her suitcase upstairs to her old room. The posters were gone, the bed neatly made, but the faint outlines of memories clung to the walls. She ran her hand across the desk where she had once scribbled late-night essays, and for a moment she felt like a teenager again, suffocated by secrets she couldn't name. At dinner that evening, her mother sat opposite her at the long oak table. Margaret looked smaller, too, her once sharp eyes dulled with time. She wore black, though the funeral was already over. "You look tired," Margaret said softly, breaking the silence. "It's been a long trip," Emily answered, stabbing at her food. Her mother nodded, but didn't ask more. That was always Margaret's way, distance wrapped in politeness. After dinner, Emily wandered into her father's study. The room was untouched, as though he might walk in at any moment. His books still lined the shelves, and his desk was scattered with papers. Emily ran her fingers along the spines, stopping at the leather-bound journal half hidden beneath a stack. She pulled it free but didn't open it yet. Instead, she stood by the window, staring at the garden her father had once tended so carefully. A sound startled her, the creak of a floorboard. She turned, expecting her mother, but the doorway was empty. The house seemed to whisper with echoes. That night, lying in bed, Emily couldn't sleep. Memories crowded her. Her father's stern voice, Daniel's laughter, her brother, who hadn't come back. She hadn't spoken to him in years, not since the fight that had ripped the family apart. She had thought time would heal it, but here she was, back in the same place, and Daniel was still absent. Sometime past midnight, she sat up, restless. The journal lay on the nightstand where she had placed it earlier. With hesitant fingers, she opened it. The first page was neat, her father's precise handwriting marching across the paper. It wasn't a diary of events, not exactly. It was fragments of thoughts, half-finished sentences, confessions scribbled in the dark. "The house feels heavier every day. Margaret won't look me in the eye. Daniel has begun to ask questions I cannot answer. And Emily, sweet Emily, I must protect her from the truth. But how long can I keep it hidden? The shadow grows stronger." Emily's pulse quickened. She turned the page. "Sometimes I think I see it in the corners of the room. Not a ghost, not exactly, but a presence, the weight of lies. It sits at our table, it sleeps between us. Margaret pretends not to notice, but I know she feels it too. If the children ever knew." The words blurred before her eyes. A chill swept through her. What was her father writing about? What truth was he protecting her from? She read on until her eyes burned, but the entries stopped abruptly 3 months before his death. The last line was underlined twice, jagged with desperation. "It is only a matter of time before it all comes undone." Emily snapped the journal shut, her hands trembling. The house seemed to groan around her, settling into the silence. Somewhere in the darkness, a door clicked shut, though she was sure her mother was asleep. For the first time since she arrived, Emily felt afraid. The house wasn't just filled with memories. It was filled with secrets. Part 2: The Journal. Morning light spilled weakly through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the floor. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, the journal resting in her lap. She hadn't slept, The words inside refused to let her. Her father's voice, trapped in ink, seemed alive, whispering to her from beyond the grave. At breakfast, Margaret moved quietly about the kitchen, her hands steady as she brewed coffee. Emily studied her mother, searching for cracks, some sign that the journal's confessions were real. But Margaret's expression was the same cool mask it had always been. "Did you sleep?" her mother asked, pouring coffee into a mug. "Not much," Emily replied. Margaret only nodded. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Emily wanted to slam the journal down on the table and demand answers, but something held her back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the way her mother's eyes seemed to harden whenever the past was mentioned. Later that day, Emily slipped into the study again. She turned the pages slowly, reading fragments aloud in a whisper. Margaret avoids the truth like a plague. She believes silence will protect us, but silence is poison. Daniel looks at me with suspicion. Emily is too young, too innocent. God forgive us all. Emily closed her eyes, the words echoing. Too young, too innocent. What had she been shielded from? The door creaked, and Margaret appeared in the doorway. Her gaze flicked to the journal in Emily's hands, and for the first time her face cracked. Fear, fleeting but undeniable, passed across her features. "You shouldn't be reading that," Margaret said quietly. "Why not?" Emily shot back. "It's Dad's words, his truth. He wrote about shadows, about lies, about protecting me, protecting us. What does it mean?" Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "It means nothing. Your father, he was a complicated man. He wrote when he was troubled. Don't twist his words into something they're not." Emily's chest tightened. "Then tell me, what was he protecting me from?" Margaret's gaze lingered on her for a moment, then dropped to the floor. "Some things are better left buried, Emily. You don't need to dig them up." With that, she turned and left the study, her footsteps sharp against the hardwood floor. Emily sank into the chair, staring at the journal. If her mother refused to speak, then she had no choice but to keep reading. That evening, she carried the journal outside and sat on the porch swing. The air smelled of rain-soaked earth, and cicadas hummed in the distance. She flipped to the middle, scanning quickly until another passage caught her eye. "The shadow has a face. It smiles when I sleep, it mocks me when I wake. Cannot forgive though I've tried. Margaret says the past is gone, but the past does not vanish. It lives among us, in the walls, in the children, especially Daniel. He must never know the truth." Emily's throat tightened. Daniel, her brother. What could her father mean? What truth was so dangerous that it couldn't reach him? She remembered the last time she had seen Daniel, storming out of this house after a fight with their father, swearing never to return. She hadn't understood then. Maybe he had known more than she did. Maybe he still did. The thought gnawed at her until she couldn't bear it anymore. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts she hadn't touched in years. Daniel's number was still there, though she doubted it would work. Her finger hovered, then tapped. The line rang once, twice. Then, against all odds, a voice answered. "Emily?" Her heart leapt into her throat. "Daniel. I'm back at the house. Dad's gone." A pause. Static filled the silence before he spoke again. "I know. Mom called me. I wasn't going to come. I found Dad's journal," Emily said quickly. "He wrote things. About lies, about protecting us. He mentioned you. I think you know something. I need you to tell me." Another long silence. Then Daniel's voice, lower, sharper. "Not over the phone. If you want answers, you'll have to come see me." "Where?" "I'll text you an address." The call ended. Emily sat frozen, the phone pressed to her ear, the cicadas buzzing louder in the darkness. When the message came a minute later, she read the address twice. It wasn't far, a small town just an hour away. Still, the weight of it pressed down on her. For the first time in years, she would face her brother. And perhaps, at last, she would learn the truth their father had tried so hard to bury. Part 3. The Brother's Silence. The drive to the address Daniel had texted felt longer than an hour. Emily's fingers tightened around the steering wheel as trees blurred past the windows. Her stomach knotted with unease. She hadn't seen her brother in over a decade. They had been close once, inseparable as children, until the night everything shattered. When she finally pulled up, the house surprised her. It wasn't run down, as she had imagined, but small and neat, tucked into a quiet street lined with maple trees. A motorcycle leaned against the porch railing, and the faint sound of a radio drifted from inside. Emily hesitated at the door before knocking. It opened after a moment, revealing a man she barely recognized. Daniel had changed. His jaw sharper, his hair longer, flecked with gray despite his 35 years. His eyes, however, were the same, intense, searching. "Emily," he said flatly, leaning against the doorframe. "Daniel," she breathed. "You look different." He gave a humorless smile. "So do you." Then, after a pause, "Come in." Inside, the house was simple but lived in. Books piled on the coffee table, an old guitar in the corner, photographs stacked rather than hung. Emily sat on the couch while Daniel remained standing, arms crossed. "So," he said, "you found Dad's journal." Emily blinked. "How do you know?" "You wouldn't have called me otherwise." He studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. "What did you read?" She swallowed. "He wrote about shadows, lies, protecting us. And you, he said you must never know the truth." "What does that mean?" For a moment, Daniel didn't answer. He paced the room, rubbing a hand over his face. When he finally stopped, he looked at her with something between anger and sorrow. "Dad wasn't who you thought he was," Daniel said quietly. "And Mom, she isn't either." Emily's chest tightened. "Stop speaking in riddles. Just tell me." Daniel's jaw worked. "Do you remember that night? The fight?" Emily nodded slowly. She had been 18, Daniel 22. Their father had shouted so loudly the walls had shaken. Daniel had stormed out, slamming the door so hard it cracked the frame. She had cried herself to sleep, never learning why. "I confronted him," Daniel said. His voice was low, rough. "I had questions. Questions I'd been carrying for years. Why he looked at me differently. Why Mom always seemed tense around me. And he finally admitted it. Half-truths, anger, bitterness, but enough. Enough for me to know." Emily's pulse hammered. "Know what?" Daniel met her gaze. His eyes, usually guarded, burned with intensity. "He wasn't my father." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible. Emily stared, her mind reeling. That can't be true." "He told me himself," Daniel snapped. "Not directly, not kindly, but I heard it between every word. Mom had an affair. He knew, and it poisoned everything. Every look, every silence in that house. It all makes sense now." Emily shook her head, unable to process. "But if that's true, why didn't Mom ever say anything? Why didn't Dad tell me?" "Because you were his," Daniel said bitterly. "His blood, his pride. You were the daughter he wanted to protect. I was just the reminder." Emily's throat ached. She wanted to deny it, to reject the idea outright. But the journal entries came rushing back. Especially Daniel. He must never know the truth. Her voice trembled. "So all those years, the fights, the coldness, it was because of this?" Daniel let out a sharp laugh. "It was always because of this." He could never forgive her, but he couldn't leave her either. So he lived with it, let it rot him from the inside. And we lived in that rot. Emily pressed her hands to her face, trying to steady her breathing. The walls of Daniel's house seemed to close in. Everything she had believed about her family was unraveling. After a long silence, she whispered, "Do you know who?" Daniel cut her off.
"No."
"And I don't care anymore. Whoever he was, he ruined us before we were even born. That's all I need to know." Emily lowered her hands, her eyes burning. "But I care. I need to know, Daniel. If what you're saying is true, then everything I thought I was, it's a lie." Daniel's expression softened. just slightly. He sat beside her for the first time, the weight of years hanging between them. "You don't want this truth, Emily," he said quietly. "It doesn't fix anything. It only breaks more." But Emily wasn't convinced. Her father's journal, her mother's silence, Daniel's pain. They all pointed to something bigger, something unfinished. And Emily knew, deep in her bones, that until she uncovered the whole truth, the shadows in that house would never let her go. Part 4, the letter. The house groaned in the night, as if resenting her presence. Emily wandered through the upstairs hallway, her footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floorboards. Sleep had been impossible after visiting Daniel. His words circled in her mind like vultures, tearing at everything she thought she knew. Not his son. Mom had an affair. The rot was always there. She stopped at the attic door. It had always frightened her as a child, a narrow stairway leading into shadows. But something tugged at her now, as though the house itself were guiding her upward. The attic was stuffy, the air thick with dust and mothballs. Boxes were stacked like forgotten tombstones, their labels fading. She pulled one open, old toys, yellowing Christmas cards, school drawings. The next, newspaper clippings, bundles of letters tied with string. Emily sifted through them with growing unease until her fingers brushed against an envelope, brittle with age, its paper browned at the edges. Her father's name was written on the front in looping, feminine handwriting. She slid the letter free, her hands trembling. The words inside were blurred with time, but still legible. "Dearest Thomas, I cannot keep this from you any longer. What happened between us was real, and though I know it was wrong, I cannot regret it. He is mine, but he is also yours in a way. You will see him grow, though the world will never know. Forgive me for my silence. Forgive me for the pain." Emily's breath caught. Her eyes darted to the bottom of the page. The letter was unsigned. Her chest tightened. "He is mine, but he is also yours." Could only mean one thing. Daniel. Her mother had hidden this, tucked it away in the attic, thinking no one would find it. Emily sank to the floorboards, the letter trembling in her hands. Her father had known. He had carried this knowledge, this betrayal, for decades. The journal, the bitterness, the silence. All of it came from here. Footsteps creaked on the stairs behind her. Emily stuffed the letter back into the envelope just as Margaret appeared at the top of the attic steps. "What are you doing up here?" her mother asked, her voice calm but strained. Emily held the envelope to her chest. "I could ask you the same. How long were you planning to hide this from me? From us?" Margaret's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to Emily's face. For the first time, the mask slipped. Her mother looked tired. Not stern, not angry, just unbearably tired. "Where did you find that?" she asked softly. "In a box," Emily said, her voice sharp. "Among old junk. Was that what Dad was writing about in his journal? Was this the truth he was trying to shield us from?" Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. She lowered herself onto an old trunk, her shoulders sagging. "You don't understand," Margaret whispered. "I was young, lonely. Your father was away for work, gone more than he was home. I made a mistake, and I've paid for it every day since." Emily's heart pounded. A mistake that became Daniel. Her mother flinched. "Don't call him that. He is my son. He is your brother. Nothing changes that." "But it changed everything for Dad," Emily snapped. "It destroyed him. It destroyed us." Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought if I buried it deep enough, it would disappear, that we could go on as if it never happened. But the past has a way of seeping through the walls." Emily's grip tightened on the letter. Who was he? The man? Margaret's gaze dropped to the floor. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she whispered, "Someone your father trusted. Someone who should have stayed far from me. That's all I'll say." The answer twisted in Emily's gut, leaving her both sick and unsatisfied. She wanted to demand more, but the sight of her mother's tears stopped her. For the first time, Emily saw Margaret not as the cold, distant woman she'd resented, but as someone broken by choices and their consequences. But pity didn't erase betrayal. Emily stood, clutching the letter. Daniel deserves to know. He's lived his whole life feeling like an outsider. You let him think it was in his head when it wasn't. Margaret's voice trembled. Please, Emily, if you love your brother, don't tell him. It will only bring him more pain. Emily's jaw tightened. The pain is already here. You just never faced it. She turned away, leaving her mother in the dim attic light. The letter burned in her hand like a living thing. For the first time, Emily understood the truth her father had carried. Some secrets don't die. They linger, waiting to be unearthed. And once found, they demand to be faced. Part 5: The Confrontation. Emily couldn't wait any longer. The letter pulsed in her pocket like a ticking clock, demanding to be read aloud, demanding to be known. She drove back to Daniel's house the next morning, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. When he opened the door, his face hardened immediately. What now? I found something, Emily said, stepping past him before he could stop her. She pulled the envelope from her jacket and dropped it on the table between them. Read it. Daniel's jaw clenched as he opened the letter. His eyes scanned the page, the lines carving deeper into his forehead with each word. When he finally looked up, his face was pale, his expression hollow. So it's true, he whispered. I always knew, but seeing it... His voice broke, and he pressed the letter against the table as though it might burst into flames. Emily swallowed hard. I confronted Mom. She admitted it. Daniel laughed bitterly. Of course she did. After Dad's gone. After it can't hurt her anymore. It still hurts, Emily said softly. It's tearing us apart. He looked at her sharply. It already tore us apart, Emily. Years ago. We've just been pretending we could tape the pieces back together. Emily shook her head. I can't pretend anymore. Neither can you. We need to face her. Together. For a long moment, Daniel stared at her, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded. The house was heavy with silence when they entered. Margaret was in the kitchen, her hands busy with dishes that didn't need washing. When she saw them together, her eyes widened, but she quickly masked it with a tight smile. Daniel, she said softly, as though speaking his name might shatter something delicate. He didn't smile back. He set the letter on the counter between them. You should have told me. Margaret's hand froze on the dish towel. Her eyes flicked to Emily, then to Daniel. I wanted to protect you. Protect me? Daniel's voice rose, sharp and raw. You let me grow up feeling like a stranger in my own house. You let me think I was imagining it, that Dad's coldness was my fault. You let me hate myself when all along. His voice cracked. He shoved the letter back toward her. It was you. It was your lie. Margaret's shoulders sagged. I know, and I'm sorry. I can never take it back. But Daniel, you are still my son. That will never change. He shook his head, tears shining in his eyes. Maybe not, but I'll never be his. Emily stepped between them, her own voice trembling. This is killing us. All of us. Dad knew, and it destroyed him. It destroyed you, Mom. It destroyed Daniel. If we keep hiding it, it'll destroy me too. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. What do you want me to do, Emily? Stand in the street and shout it to the world? Humiliate myself? Destroy what little peace we have left? Peace. Emily's voice was sharp. This house hasn't known peace in decades. All it knows is silence and shadows. The room went still. Margaret's hands gripped the counter, her knuckles white. Daniel stood rigid, his chest heaving. Finally, Margaret whispered, What do you want from me? Emily's throat tightened. She looked at her brother, then at her mother. The truth, out loud. No more silence. No more pretending. Margaret's tears spilled freely now. She turned to Daniel, her voice shaking. Yes, I had an affair. You are the result of that. But you are not a mistake. You are my son, Daniel. I love you more than I can ever say. Daniel's face crumpled. For a moment, Emily thought he would walk out again, just as he had all those years ago. But he didn't. He stood rooted in place, his fists trembling at his sides. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said hoarsely. Margaret nodded slowly. I don't expect you to. I only ask that you try. Daniel didn't look at her. I shouldn't have read that letter. It was better when it was just a suspicion. Easier to hate Dad than to know the truth about Mom. Emily sat on the swing beside him. The metal was cold beneath her hands. But now you know. We both do. We can't unknow it. For a long time Daniel said nothing. The wind rustled the leaves. A dog barked in the distance. Finally he spoke, his voice low. I spent my whole life wondering why he treated me differently. Now I know. But it doesn't fix anything, Em. It doesn't give me back the childhood I should have had. It doesn't make him my father. No, Emily said softly. But it makes Mom human. She made mistakes, huge ones. But she still loved you. She still does. Daniel finally turned to look at her. His eyes were red, raw with sleeplessness. And you? What about you? Are you just going to forgive her? Pretend none of this matters. Emily shook her head. It matters. It matters more than anything. But hating her won't fix it either. We can either let this truth finish destroying us, or we can try to live with it. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Try to live with it. Sounds simple when you say it. It's not simple, Emily whispered. It's the hardest thing we'll ever do. But Dad's gone, Daniel. If we keep letting his pain run our lives, then we're just letting him suffer all over again. We have to end it. Daniel's grip on the chains loosened. He stared at the ground for a long while before finally nodding. I don't know if I can forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'll try not to hate her anymore. Emily exhaled, relief flooding her chest. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. That evening, the three of them sat at the table together for the first time in years. The air was thick with unspoken words, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of before. It was fragile, tentative, a silence with space for something new. Margaret reached across the table, her hands shaking, and set them over Daniel's. I don't deserve it, she whispered. But thank you for staying. Daniel didn't pull away. He didn't squeeze her hand either. But he let it rest there, and for Margaret that was enough. Emily watched them, her throat tight. She realized that healing didn't come in sweeping gestures or perfect reconciliations. It came in tiny cracks of light, small choices to stay instead of run, to speak instead of hide. The truth had broken them, but maybe, just maybe, it could also rebuild them. Later that night, Emily walked through the house alone. She paused in her father's study, her hand resting on the journal. She thought about his words, about shadows, about lies, about protecting her. You did protect me, Dad, she whispered. But not from the truth. From yourself. From the pain you never learned to face. She closed the journal and set it gently back on the shelf. The house seemed to breathe with her, its weight a little lighter now. As she climbed the stairs, she heard faint voices from the kitchen, her mother and brother, speaking softly, tentatively. It wasn't laughter, not yet, but it wasn't anger either. For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to hope. The shadows were still there. The scars would never fully fade. But families weren't about perfection. They were about survival. And this one, broken, battered, scarred, had chosen to survive.